Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, a little bit rejuvenated after a combination of Christmas and New Year's. Hope you guys are also rejuvenated. We need rejuvenation when it comes to being fans of this team and this franchise, which, Nick, I never thought I would say it like that in such a accepted way of what this has become, because my whole life this team was never like this, like a just bottom barrel team. But things can change in the NFL. I want to just say that to start. This is not like the MLB. We are not fans of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We don't have no chance in hell. The Pittsburgh Pirates fans, they don't have a chance in hell to compete. It doesn't matter what they do with their farm system, because in the MLB, the Dodgers and the Mets, they're spending $200 billion, whatever dollars it is. You have no chance in that sport. In this sport, things can change really, really fast. Now, almost always the change happens at quarterback, and that's what sparks everything. There are rare occasions. John Lynch came in with the 49ers, built a really good team around, and then they started winning a lot. But even in that scenario, if you ask Nick or I, when we watch the film of Brock Purdy, he's a really good quarterback. He throws with an incredible amount of anticipation. His ball placement is great. He beats blitzes. He knows where they're coming from. He adjusts to things pre-snap and post-snap. So that's not even a good example of the latter.
But that example is actually a good one if we want to take this conversation in another direction, which also could pertain to the New York Giants. And it's a fact that John Lynch traded up to draft Trey Lance 3rd overall, and then drafted Brock Purdy with literally the last pick. He was Mr. Irrelevant in his draft. And Brock Purdy was able to make that I would say, perennial playoff contender, even though they didn't make it this year, but possible even a Super Bowl contender. So it just goes to show you that this is not an exact science, and you can swing and miss massively and still hit if you are able to bring your hit rate up. Now, that's the big question with this podcast. Can Joe Schoen and the New York Giants bring that hit rate up? And we'll get into that when we go over the drafts.
Yeah, and there's 3 ways I see it. It's the one we've discussed, and we're going to talk about a lot of things today before I say that. This episode, well, I'll get into that in a second. It's the one we discussed, which is get the quarterback. It's the second one you discussed, which is bring up your hit rate in these drafts. That's really important around the quarterback, all the positions like the 49ers have done. And the third one is get the right coach to establish a culture. Now, that third one, I believe, is very dependent on winning football games. And I don't mean winning a game at 2-13 or 2-12 to get you to 3-13 or whatever the hell it is. I mean winning the actual games early in the season to get you in playoff contention every year. That's what culture really is. And that's how you build it out. But those are the 3 tenets. And today we're going to discuss a lot because we're doing a whole breakdown. This is what the episode is about. If Joe Schoen should stay, if he should go, our thoughts on will he go? We'll make predictions at the end. Will he stay? Will Brian Daboll go? Will he stay? We'll touch a little bit on Daboll as well. Should he stay? We're going to do a lot of things. We've kind of broken this down to a few different pillars, but I want to start this debate, Nick, and we'll get into it right now with a question for each of us. I'll ask you, and then you can ask me.
Okay.
If Joe Schoen should be retained as Giants GM heading into this offseason, what, in your mind, is the number one reason why he should be?
If Joe Schoen is to be retained, I would say the number one reason why, the one I'm going to go over here, would be the cap health moving forward for the New York Giants and what Joe Schoen ended up inheriting from Dave Gettleman. Dave Gettleman, he took this job. He tried extending the window of Eli Manning's career by making a bunch of reckless trades and also free agent signings that did not pan out. And he kept doing that until the end of his tenure when he retired from the general manager position. Joe Schoen inherited quite a bit of dead cap, and we'll go over some of that. Here's the 2022 dead cap number that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll inherited. He had a $12.6 million dead cap hit from Logan Ryan, $11.7 million dead cap hit from James Bradbury, about an $8 million dead cap hit from Blake Martinez, $4 million from Nate Solder, $2.4 from Kyle Rudolph. So
much.
We're talking about a pretty high percentage of the cap. Yes. We're talking like 6 plus 5% plus 3% plus a bunch of 1%. So we're talking in the mid-teens to high teens of dead cap that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll inherited. And this doesn't even take into account 2023, which incorporated Kenny Galladay's dead cap. And I'll bring that up here in a second, but I want to get your opinion just on the 2022 dead cap and how difficult it is for a general manager to inherit this when he is trying to retinker and retool the roster.
Yeah, it's an excellent point by you, because he was at such a heavy disadvantage heading into this, and more so than most general managers if we look back at the last, decade of general managers taking over spots, because the previous general manager, Dave Gettleman, was very, very reckless with his spending. You could see it from there. I believe the Giants got to a point really almost every year, I think, under Gettleman, they had like massive percentage of dead cap, because I remember it started when he traded Odell Beckham just months after signing him to that contract. And whenever you sign someone to a mega contract and then trade them a little bit later, you are taking on so much dead cap as a team. So that first year, I remember, was like 23 million dead cap for OBJ, or some insane number in the 20s. And that kind of started it. It got to a point where I think 30% of the team's total cap, about 30%, was dead cap from Dave Gettleman's reckless spending and his reckless contracts. As you mentioned, which is really important, Nick, this wasn't just an issue that Joe Schoen could wash his hands of after fixing in 2022. It was a process for him. He had to start low, start at this disadvantage, and really work through ways to clean up the cap and get them in the healthy cap situation they are in now, which you're about to explain later, heading into this offseason. And they are in a very healthy cap spot, especially considering that they have the Daniel Jones contract. And he had to work through it through multiple years, like you said, because even after 2022, he still had dead cap from Galladay and from Solder, like deferred, and like other dead cap. This was just an example. I mean, Dave recklessly spent on guys like Kenny Galladay, Logan Ryan. Remember, he re-signed him, and then they had to cut him later because he's like 30 years old, and Dave Gettleman's giving him like 30 million contract at 30 years old for a middling safety his whole career, really, if we're being honest about the situation. Good player, solid player, no one who should ever be getting, 30 million at 30 years old. So Dave really recklessly spent in ways that Joe has never done since he was general manager, with the exception, obviously, of the Daniel Jones contract, but that has so many like balls and chains attached to it, right, Nick? The DJ contract. It's not like when you go out and you sign, for example, you go out, you get Kenny Galladay like Dave Gettleman did. Well, we think back to that free agency, Nick, and not a single team, including the Lions, not a single team was bidding against Dave Gettleman for Kenny Galladay. It came out that the only offer he had was a 1-year, basically prove it type deal with the Bears. And then Dave gives him 3 years with a ton of guaranteed money and a crazy APY. So, like, that's the type of spending that has ceased to exist since Joe Schoen has taken over. But question being, Nick, and I'll let you get back into this now. The question being is, should that really be a barometer of success for Joe Schoen? Just because someone is as bad as Dave Gettleman was at managing the cap, at spending, at free agents, at everything that Dave was horrible at, with the exception of, he located Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas, good for him, and Xavier McKinney. But, because Dave Gettleman was so bad and Joe Schoen is just kind of not that bad, is that really a tip of the cap to Joe or not? And we'll work through that.
And we'll work through that throughout the entire podcast. We also have here on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, the 2023 dead money cap. The Kenny Galladay, you can see it made up about, round up, 7% of the Giants cap was Kenny Galladay's dead cap hit from the contract that was allocated to him in 2021. They have Leonard Williams' dead cap up here as well. That was obviously a trade to the Seattle Seahawks, a little bit different. I think when Williams was signed March 2021, I think is when he was extended. So the last free agent period.
That by the way, I don't want to cut you off, but it's important to note before we move past it. That was actually, I thought, very savvy move by Joe Schoen, because he took on Leonard Williams' dead cap in a year where it didn't really matter to the team because they had already lost and the season was over, and took that on, which allowed him to get that early second-round pick. Otherwise, he would have probably got a third or fourth-round compensation back from Seattle. But Seattle was like, we can't pay this cap. Are you willing to take on the dead hit? And the Giants, well, we're out of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's not a reflection necessarily on I don't even really want to use this as a way to disparage Dave Gettleman, because signing I think Leonard Williams at that time wasn't necessarily a terrible move. What's your move on that? Or what's your
Well, it was terrible because it was terrible just based on the process of how he went about it, Dave, right? So Dave trades for Leonard Williams in his contract
That
season.
was 2019, though.
Oh, the restructuring
Yeah.
you're talking about?
Yes, the
Oh, the
restructuring back
restructuring
in
of his deal, yeah.
2021.
No, that was just Dave put in a spot where he's like, "Wow, I've really fucked up my cap.
Yeah,
I need to
it
restructure this
seems
contract now to
it
just
seems
give us."
to be a lot of doubling down, and that was a
Yeah,
lot
oh,
of
yeah,
what Dave
David was
Gettleman. Yes.
constantly doubling down with his moves and restructuring,
But
and it
but
was
the
one
reason
of the most reckless GM periods you'll ever see.
Yeah, exactly. But the reason why we're bringing this up is to just showcase how Shane had to inherit this and it bled into 2023. And then when you even get into 2024, and this goes into this is more so Joe Shane's decision making that ended up hurting him. You got the dead cap from Darren Waller, right? Because Darren
Sure.
Waller ends up retiring. Now, the dead cap from Darren Waller, if I could pull that up here, I'll get it up on the screen in a little bit, was I think it was about 6% of the cap or something to that effect. Regardless of the fact, if you were going in, and this is something Dan and I have discussed, if you were making the decision to continue with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley after the 2022 season, I was fine with the trade for Darren Waller, if that's what you are going to do. And I know a lot of Giant fans kind of forget the mindset of the Giants at that time. Everybody was really hyped about Daniel Jones. We weren't necessarily as ecstatic about that. We thought $40 million was the absolute ridiculous contract to allocate towards Daniel Jones. But if you're going in that direction, trading the 100th overall pick in the draft to get an older tight end, but one who could still be effective, I thought was a move that the Giants should have made. And obviously, in retrospect and hindsight, it did not work out.
Yeah, I mean, we could get to a point. I didn't even think about this, but we should get to a point at some point in this pod. I'll write this down so we can circle back to it. But just our hindsight, because that's what it is now. We're talking about this on January 3rd, 2025. Our hindsight, but it's important to note anyway, Nick, so we can kind of look back at here they were. Joe Shane's biggest decisions and where we came out on those. So at some point I wanted to I'm going to write that down. Joe, just so we can do that, because one of those I think could be argued is the Waller. And I obviously want to talk about the Jones thing one more time, just so we can kind of finalize and unpack it, just the decision making, the process at that moment for Joe Shane, some of which you just touched on. But as far as the Waller trade goes, Nick, I am with you on that. See, this is viewed a lot as a negative for Joe Schoen, and I see it on Giants Twitter a lot. People bring this up as like a really bad decision by him. I don't agree with that. I think that you have to look at the process. And sure, you can now look at it in hindsight and say, see, he was injured a lot and he was going to get injured. But injuries are very difficult to predict. I've made this case a lot. There are guys who are injury prone in the NFL. Then they go 3 years without getting injured. I think the best example of how stupid and luck-based injuries are, Nick, is Christian McCaffrey. Because Christian McCaffrey was a dominant fantasy football player. And then about 3 years ago, Nick, he had two straight injured years. And people were like, we can't draft Christian McCaffrey in the first round. And then he had 2 great years, the 2 years before this, Nick. And it's like first pick overall. We don't even care. So that same people that were like, I can't draft him no matter what, he's so injury prone, had just forgotten about the injury prone and then went and drafted him number 1 overall in their fantasy drafts this year, Nick. And then he got hurt again. So it's just like sometimes you're hurt, sometimes you're not. It's basically luck. We saw it with Barkley. Barkley's running a route over the middle of the field. He's not even involved in the play that year. Remember that? And he like hits a Cowboy's heel, and now he's injured for 4 to 6 weeks and never the same the rest of the season. These are just luck-based incidents. So I don't blame him for Darren Waller getting hurt. Do I blame him for Darren Waller being the type of athlete who's going to retire randomly at 31? No, not really, Nick, because he doesn't have time to like psychologically break down Darren Waller. He's making a trade with a GM and he's saying to himself, all I have to risk here, this is the process. The process is I could get a big playmaker to operate in the middle of the field for my quarterback. And all I have to risk after, we had no playmakers on that offense 2022. And all I have to risk is the 100th overall pick in a draft. That's where you get Julian Love types. That's where you get good solid players, Theo Johnson, but never, very rarely, unless you're the Chiefs, stars at that position, at that spot of the draft, I should say. So to me, the gamble is an easy one. And it's one that I would make again if I were in his spot. And with that in mind, I don't mind that move in a sense. And I even would somewhat applaud that move, as crazy as that sounds, Nick, given the hindsight.
I know that's not a popular opinion, but I'm right there with you. And it's also goes to how you want to judge your own athletic department. And if you remember, there was a big study that came out how the 2022 New York Giants significantly reduced their soft tissue injuries. And you and I joked on the podcast saying, well, one reason why was because they cut Kadarius or they got rid of the trade of Kadarius Toney to the Kansas City Chiefs. And he was one of the primary people who came through with those soft tissue injuries during the Dave Gettleman era. But yeah, no, if you're going all in, you got to go all in at that point. And the conversation at that time was, oh, trade a first round pick for Brandon Ayuk or T. Higgins or a star receiver. They didn't have to trade a first round pick. And they're able to go out and sign draft an absolute stud at Deonte Banks that year. I wish it was that case, but they did draft Deonte Banks. And if you're watching on YouTube, I brought up the 2024 dead cap hit before. Look, the 47 mil hits now with Daniel Jones, but we all know how that goes because the Giants cut him during this lost season, which is fine. And then Leonard Williams also amounted for about 10 mil dead cap from the trade last year, but that's only about 5%, a little bit less, 5% of the cap that year. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, it's 2025 moving forward. You got 8% of the cap with that Daniel Jones, and then you're off the hook. And that's basically it. That's the only cap hit. And that was built into the decision of re-signing Daniel Jones, was you can get out of this relatively unscathed after 2 years with a just north of $20 million cap hit, which is not that much when you're talking about a quarterback who had a $160 million contract. So that would be, just bring this full circle, I think one of the biggest selling points, other than the 2025 draft, which we'll talk about in a little bit, to Joe Schoen retaining his job, if I were to make that argument for him.
Yeah, and I think that just to follow up on that and give some thoughts on that before I get to my number one argument, it's that, yeah, putting this team in a healthy cap spot is really important. And it's something that we didn't have with the previous general manager. It's something we didn't always have with even the general manager before that, Jerry Reese. There were times where the Giants got a little overspendy and just put themselves in difficult spots. So I think that speaks to kind of who he is as a GM. And there are parts of who he is. Obviously, it's why we were so excited in 2022, Nick, that are exciting. Like his ability to understand the cap and manage the cap, his ability to kind of,
which Kevin Abrams needs to be factored into that too.
Kevin Abrams should be factored in that as well. But he, Joe Schoen has made that important. His understanding of positional value and how it impacts the cap, his understanding in general of like trades and things of that nature. I think Joe Schoen has done a good job on that. I think he's close to what you want in a GM, but he's missing some big components, and we'll get to that later, which is, why, we can get to where we're at with this, but we'll make our predictions, Nick, and we'll say where we feel. But I think the listeners, we've talked about this now for 2.5 months. I think they know where we're at. And I'll make that clear now, just in case if anybody's new to listening, but I don't think Joe Schoen should be retained at all. And I don't think, and if you lose him, I think you can lose Brian Daboll as well. It's to the point, Nick, where I honestly feel more comfortable with Daboll coming back than Schoen, because tangibly speaking, I know that Brian Daboll can at least call an offense and run routes that get open. And I'll say this now, because we're going to get to this a bit later, but I'll drop this now. I was speaking with someone who works very closely with the Giants. Let's just say that is involved with this. And, we were talking pretty candidly about this team and this situation. There was no holding back. It wasn't like a shill type conversation from the person. They weren't defending the Giants in any way. And the one thing they said that they keep coming back to is like, Daboll can get receivers open. And that's what the tape is telling this person that's close to the Giants. And that's what the tape is telling us, Nick. So tangibly speaking, Daboll can give us that. Tangibly speaking, what has and what can Joe Schoen give us? That's what we have to answer. And that to me feels like I have more tangible evidence with Daboll, so I'm more comfortable bringing him back. I know that will never be the case. They'll never keep Daboll and fire Schoen.
So I don't want to take this conversation another direction, but I think it applies here with Joe Schoen if he does retain his job. One thing Joe Schoen has done every time the roster was devoid of talent at a certain position, he has poured assets into that position, right? If you go back to 2022, he takes over that roster. Linebackers are shit. The run defense was ass. What did he do the next offseason? Signs Bobby Okereke, 10 mil, gets Ashawn Robinson, Nacho, still has Dexter Lawrence, still has Leonard Williams, beefs up the line to stop the run. This past year, and then that same year, you get Darren Waller as well, because the offense did not have that skill position player. You couldn't get the wide receiver one that you wanted, even though they were looking at the Jordan Addisons and even the Quentin Johnsons in the draft, but you get Darren Waller. This past year, though, they did not do that with the quarterback position. They did not do that at all. And I think I could see Joe Schoen, if he retains his job, spending up a little bit in free agency and getting a good quarterback and actually drafting a number one quarterback at whatever pick they freaking have. And I just wanted to throw that at you and get that conversation started to see what you think about that. I wanted to propound that idea. What are your thoughts?
Wait, I'm not following exact. So go back in. So just give me that breakdown again real quick.
Yeah, I think when Joe Schoen, when he has overlooked, or whenever the team that he presiding over the New York Giants, whenever they have had a point of their roster that's a significant weakness, he has poured assets in it in the next season to ensure that it was not a weakness. And that was really telling, I would say, after the 2022 season when they were successful by beefing up the run defense and then the linebacker. And then that same year, another big issue that season, even though the Giants made the playoffs, was they didn't have a skill position player. They ended up going out and getting Darren Waller. Now, this past offseason, what was it? It was the offensive line. Everybody was talking, oh, the offensive line, it sucks. Offensive line sucks. So what does he do? He goes out and gets John Runyon. He gets Jermaine Illuminor, and he beefs up the offensive line. He makes that a strength of the team. And I think this year, if he retains his job, you're looking at him going, what was the biggest weakness of the New York Giants? Obviously, the quarterback position, something he did not allocate nearly enough to last year. I overcorrect on that, sign a veteran quarterback, and also possibly draft one in the first round.
Oh yeah, no. This is I see where I didn't understand the.
I probably didn't do a good job explaining it.
No, you did fine. I just didn't really see where you're coming with that. I thought you were framing it as like something that's good from Joe Schoen. It's the total opposite. It's at least for me, it's the nervousness.
Well, it's not even necessarily a good or a bad thing.
I think it could be a very bad thing.
I think it could be a very bad thing. Yes. I think you could also view it as a positive thing, depending on how you kind of want to attack it. But the reason why I'm putting this out there right now, and I hope this makes sense contextually, is because I think the Giants are going to really attack the quarterback position if he does retain his job.
Yeah, they will. And that, to me, is part of the reason why I think he should be fired, because I don't think, and I posted about this yesterday, Nick, but he's the one who said it, so I'll use his words, but he said you never want to shop hungry. Was that Dave Gettleman who said that? Whoever said it, I hope it wasn't Dave, because Dave was the king of shopping hungry. It's part of why he was one of the worst GMs in the history of the sport.
Dave was the type of guy who would smoke a blunt and then go to ShopRite. He was the type of guy who would smoke a blunt and go to ShopRite. That's cheese, man. He was shopping hungry, bro.
You can't go food shopping high. It's literally one of the number one things you cannot do in life, food shop high. And that's probably not true. There's so many more things you can't do in life, but for idiots like myself and Nick, it's up there on our list. But and Nick's not an idiot, but I am, and it's up there on my list. So, and one thing that's also up there on my list, I've talked about this a bunch on Fantasy Football today. We'll have a quick aside here. Sorry, fast forward if you don't like it, but.
Want to know what's great for the holidays? A nice toasty set of chestnuts, preferably not roasting on an open fire, but existing in a comfortable, orderly condition. Skims provides said comfort so you can jingle all the way. Look, guys, we all hate the ride up, that cramped feeling of unforgiving underwear that constantly has you adjusting your little helpers. We deserve better than that. Skims takes care of us, and they're a perfect stocking stuffer for Christmas. They have multiple options for you: stretch, cotton, and if you shop Skims men's at skims.com, let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect gifts for the whole family, Skims just launched their biggest holiday shop ever, also available at skims.com. Don't let your little friends down. Go and get yourself a pair of Skims. You'll thank me later. It's the holiday season, and we have Manscaped, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver here for you. Look, if you want the best shave, if you want to look your best to the nines for the holidays, you got to get the Chairman Pro from Manscaped. If you need to shave a 5 o'clock shadow, a 5-day long growth of your beard, the Chairman Pro has you covered. If you head on over to manscaped.com right now and join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by using code BIGBLUE for 20% off, you'll get free shipping as well. So head on over to Manscaped and do just that. The code is BIGBLUE. Get the Chairman Pro today and experience a shave that is as smooth as you deserve. Get that 20% off plus free shipping with the code BIGBLUE at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code BIGBLUE at manscaped.com.
Don't be the guy who doesn't return the shopping cart. If you are that guy or you're that girl listening, I got news for you. You still have time to change, but you're not the best human right now. And you need to be a better human. You can't just leave the cart by your car, have it jiggling around the fucking parking lot, then it hits a car or it's in the way or whatever. Return it to the freaking thing. Go back, do it. It takes you 13 seconds. Be a good human being. You don't get anything for it. It's just no one's going to know, but you did a good thing for everybody else. Anyway.
I know where I'm putting the ads. All right.
Those are the two things you can't do in grocery stores. But yeah, I mean, the shopping hungry, which is what he or Dave said, we never want to shop hungry. Well, that's what he might be doing this offseason at the quarterback position. And that could have massive, massive repercussions for the roster building process. And so, with that in mind, it gets
But
scary.
isn't there there's an argument at least to be had to say I want him to really attack that quarterback position.
I
So
always want him
where's
to
the line
attack.
there?
Well, that's a great point, Nick, because you
Yeah,
always should want him to be attacking the quarterback position unless he has like Mahomes and Burrow,
of
which he
course.
doesn't have. And we bashed him, and we will continue to later in the show for his approach to the quarterback room this 2024 offseason. Okay. We decided it was one, I decided, you decided it was one of the worst approaches I've ever seen to a quarterback room. It made no sense in multiple ways. One, with his evaluation of Jones, two, with his evaluation of Tyrod, three, with his evaluation of Locke, and four, with his evaluation of Tommy DeVito. So all four things were horrific evaluations, really, across the board from Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. I'm going to put it on Shane, though, because listening to Brian Daboll in his press conferences, it really does not feel like they were aligned at quarterback. And if you go back and listen to Hard Knocks, it really does not feel like Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll were aligned at quarterback. Because Brian Daboll does not come off in Hard Knocks at any point as complimentary of Daniel Jones. He does not come off in Hard Knocks at any point as being happy about, all right, if we can't get the quarterback trade up, we'll just roll with Jones and a playmaker. He didn't seem at all enthused by that.
And if you paid attention to the Brian Daboll press conferences, specifically the one after the Colts win, he's essentially pleading for his job.
Yeah.
The beat reporters were asking him good questions, like, oh, so how does it feel about all this stuff? And he's just like, well, this is what happens when your quarterback doesn't turn the football over. And he's just like, I don't have a quarterback. That's what he's saying. He's like, I do not have a quarterback. If you give me a competent quarterback, I can get the job done. I can put 45 points on the board against an adequate defense who is desperate and trying to win a football game. If you give me a quarterback who doesn't shit all over himself, that's what Brian Daboll was saying to the entire
and
New
it's
York.
not just shit all over himself. That's what he's mentioned with the tournament. But he also said the quarterback play consistent. That's the other thing. It's not, and we've discussed that at length on the show. That means getting the ball on time, on target, throwing it into space, not waiting for wide receivers to be open, managing a goddamn offense, and
not turning the football over too.
Yes, that's part two. But if you don't manage an offense and keep it in rhythm and get the ball out on time, it doesn't matter if you don't turn the ball over. You want to know how I know that? Remember the year where Jones had that 1.9 interception percentage with Jason Garrett? But we lost every game and couldn't move the ball because it doesn't matter if you don't turn it over. You still have to play the quarterback position. Someone we haven't had on this team in 6 years. Someone playing it at a level that can get the ball out on time. And now we'll hear in the comments, Dan's still talking about Daniel Jones. Of course you are. We're here because of him. So stop it with those comments and don't get me aggravated. I aggravated myself there, Nick. I'm going to calm down.
Yeah, you did.
Let it settle. Let it simmer. Those people make me so mad. Those people who say that, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But let's circle it back to something that we were discussing here with regards to that. And it's Brian Daboll. Did he ever really have a say over everything that's transpired at quarterback? Right. And you could even make the case that he really didn't. Based on Hard Knocks, it looks like he didn't. Based on watching him last year after Jones threw that disgustingly bad pick six against the Seahawks in 2023 to lose that game when they still had a chance in that season, and throwing the tablet and being like, look at this. How do you not see this over and over to Jones? Look at the tablet. How do you not process this? How are you this bad at this position? It's basically what Daboll's shown us on the sidelines, at least, his opinion of Jones. And he's never praised him really in the press conferences. Has nothing to really praise. There's nothing good to talk about. I mean, you could talk about the Seattle game. Wow, he had a good game randomly this year. But it's like, it seems pretty clear Daboll did not want this plan at quarterback, right? Even in Hard Knocks, you heard Daboll say, I'd like to keep Tyrod Taylor, right? He said that. So, I mean, that's another kind of goes in the direction of, do we really want to get rid of Daboll when this wasn't really his plan? But Joe Schoen, he deserves it, right, Nick? Like there's no escaping it for the general manager. This is your quarterback room. You are the GM. You constructed this roster. It falls on you. I know there were limited resources. The Patriots in Washington wasn't willing to trade back with you. Fine. But you didn't have to go and say, let's go lock. You didn't have to go and say, DJ's my unquestioned starter. I just need to get him a weapon.
And another reason why there were limited resources was because Joe Schoen swung and missed.
Right.
And the coaching staff also didn't develop. So that could fall under Daboll as well. But Joe Schoen swung and missed on multiple offensive line draft picks that ended up meaning they could not allocate to the most important position because they would rather put Daniel Jones coming off a torn ACL behind a stable offensive line because Evan Neal and Josh Azudu were wasted picks at this point.
Right.
So that falls on the general manager as well.
Yep. Well said, Nick. And so, again, it all does seem to fall back to Joe Schoen in this regard. But I do think it's a great point by Daboll. Like, give me some consistent quarterback play, and you never know what I am. And we're never going to get to – we may never know what that will be, Nick. As I think – and we'll get to that later. But they think they might move on from Daboll, which I think is stupid if you're going to keep Schoen. But it's interesting because there are flaws with Daboll that for all his flaws that we've brought up, the one thing is it's just tough to know what he'd be with an actual quarterback that can move the ball. I mean, we saw a little bit with Josh Allen, and keep an offense on schedule, just something we just didn't have at all. But I'll circle it back, and I'll get to my number one reason for keeping Joe Schoen. And it's actually none of the two that you mentioned earlier. It's not that the health of the cap that he's put in, and it's not the 2025 or 2024 draft class. And then we're going to get into each draft class, so I don't want to get into that too much now. To me, if you're looking at the number one reason to keep Joe Schoen, it's the 5-game sample size to start the 2024 this season. That's what it is. Yeah, the Giants were just 2-3, but they were 2-3, and we broke it down individually. You can go back and watch all of our game reviews from the first 5 weeks. Nick and I were doing an offense and the defense. That's 2.5 hours of analysis right there that will back up the point that I'm about to make. You can look at our recaps after the game, our previews of the game. All of that analysis will back up the point I'm about to make. In those first 5 games, if they had a good quarterback, they would be 4-1 or 3-2. And that sample size, and maybe it's a 6-game sample size because I want to include Cincinnati. I was at that Bengals game at home, Nick. The Giants competed and played incredibly well. It was one of the best defensive performances I've seen from the Giants in the last 5 years. Daniel Jones missed wide open receivers. I was at that game. It was one of the most pathetic quarterback displays I've seen live at a game in 5 to 10 years, that first half of that Bengals game. He missed 3 open shots that Daboll designed for him, the Wandale and a few others. And then it was so bad, Nick, that in the second half, the Bengals just said, fuck it. This guy can't complete passes 15 to 20 yards down the field. His accuracy and his ball placement and his timing is so bad at this point, because it was at that point in the season. And he had some moments in Seattle. It was okay, I guess, whatever. But like, that they just said, all right, that's it. And they're just packing it in for the second half. And they just literally played all 11 defenders were around the line of scrimmage. It was insane to watch from the 300 view. You are watching a team that on defense is playing no safety help essentially on every play. Cause there's like, wait a second, why would we do this? This guy in the first half missed all of the throws that we gave him that they were able to scheme up. And so you go back and look at those first 6 games, Nick, as far as a plus for Joe Schoen. And the O-line was playing really well. In our film reviews, Nick, and we could go back and look. I should have done this before the pod. Maybe I'll do this after and write it in the comments. But we had high 7 grades for the pass blocking over and over and over again in those first.
Other than Minnesota, yeah.
Other than Minnesota, we had high grades for the pass blocking. High grades at times for the run blocking, less so. More so high grades for the pass blocking before all the injuries, right? So I'm looking at this 6-game sample because they were actually healthy. This was the roster Joe Schoen wanted them to have, and they were playing great on the offensive line. The playmakers were making plays. Malik Neighbors' yards after the catch was insane at that point. Before teams are just like, all right, well, this offense can't move it deep. Let's just crowd around Neighbors every snap, right? The run game had some moments, not as much, mostly the pass blocking. And then the defense was playing phenomenal football, Nick. I mean, they shut down Dak even for large parts of that game. With aside that CD Lamb play, Dak, who wasn't lighting them up. Joe Burrow, no one stopped Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow has like 45 touchdowns this year and 5,000 yards somehow, Nick. And the Giants were able to completely shut down Joe Burrow for almost an entire game, despite punting on offense and punting on Daniel Jones punt, Daniel Jones punt, Daniel Jones punt, Daniel Jones turnover in the red zone, Daniel Jones sucks so bad type shit. And they keep getting the ball back, the Bengals, and it doesn't matter. So I think about it, and they had a great pass protection. They had playmakers making plays on offense, and they had a defense playing like at that point, Nick, what, top 10 in the NFL? They were number 1 in sacks. Probably not, right? That's a little bit of a stretch, but they were probably around the top 12 range as a defense when you consider they were number 1 in sacks. They completely shut down Joe Burrow. They shut down for large parts Dak Prescott. And for the most part, for those first 6 games, they really played great defense. And
week 2 pissed me off so bad, man.
Yeah, week 2.
Week 2 pissed me off. Like I was
great
I was
against
on
Jaden
one
Daniels. They had a weird game plan that didn't work against Jaden Daniels that week 2 game, but they still kept them out of the end zone in that game. The red zone defense stood up in that game. And there are moments that you can look to in those first 6 weeks. And this is the case for Joe Schoen for me. The roster that he wanted before all the injuries, the roster he put out to me was pretty damn good on defense. Good as hell at protecting the passer. There was some really good pass protection on film for those first 6 weeks. And good design to get open receivers. None of those shots were made, right? I put up a video, and you could find it again on my Twitter, of all the deep shots from the first 6 weeks of the season. there were so many misses from the quarterback. We remember, we knew it. A lot of people said, oh, he's coming off the ACL. He just doesn't get it back. He'll time it up. It'll start to get better. But when you think about all those shots they missed in those first 6 weeks, the record's 4-2 or 5-1 if they make those, Nick. They win the Dallas game for sure. They win the Bengals game for sure. Those are locks they win if the quarterback plays better football. And even those other games, you can probably argue that those missed shot plays would have changed the entire game. And you're not expecting quarterback to make every single one of them. But you're also not expecting him to go, I think it was like 0 of 11 on 40-plus throws at some point that he was.
So
1 of 11 or 1 of 13, I think was the actual stat for Daniel Jones on those 40-plus throws. So
and the one that was caught was Malik Neighbors jumping over Martin.
Yeah, and taking an interception out of the hand of the
Sam.
DB. Like, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but it's just so aggravating to me. So it's like, that's the case for Schoen. The case for Schoen is I built a roster that's protecting the passer, that's allowing Daboll to get these designs open, that's these playmakers getting open in space, that we can have an offense that's going to be pass first with big plays, explosive stuff because our pass protection is there. And the quarterback isn't there. And then on defense, I got a defense that's leading the league in NFL in sacks, and they're making progress, and they're stopping teams in the red zone and making big plays on third down to go along with that offense that I just built you with the pass protection. And then injuries happen. But even in that case, Nick, which is the best case, I think, for Joe Schoen, those first 6 weeks and how this team looked, because I really had some hope for this team outside of quarterback, which is he was just playing terrible the whole time. I know the Seattle game, great, one game, which, again, was a lot of just like design easy first reads by Daboll, as it always is with this quarterback. But anyway, that's even in his best case, Nick, he still doesn't really get a full excuse for the fact that the quarterback was his, like, this is his doing what we have at quarterback. Like, it's not like there was never any glimpse on tape of what could be better. Tyrod Taylor had the 8th best explosive pass, or the best explosive pass rate in the entire NFL last year, and the 8th best clean pocket EPA. That's a quarterback that could potentially move an offense for you. Okay, so it's not like nothing has flashed by his eyes. He's seen it all, and he made the decision that I want to justify the contract that I handed out to Daniel Jones by getting him an improved O-line and Malik Neighbors. That was his decision. And that's kind of why, even though the roster did look good in those first 6 weeks, Nick, or whatever it was before the injuries, it's hard for me to then come back to it and be like, that's the reason Joe Schoen should stay.
Exactly. And that's why you and I are both in the same boat. And it gets to the conversation about if you get rid of Schoen, then I guess Daboll has to go. But if you retain Schoen, you're going to get rid of Daboll and then have Schoen pick another head coach. And what head coach is going to really want to go into that situation? So I don't like to think of it, oh, it's a package deal no matter what. Like, I think there's more nuance to it. But at this point where we are at right now, I am sort of like, if you're going to keep Schoen, like, do you just keep Daboll? Because I don't know if I want Schoen to pick up this head coach and then that head coach be maybe a one and done if it all collapses next year. Like, It could be setting us up for a really bad situation where 2 years from now, we're just like in the same boat where we're like, oh, we suck again. We win these meaningless games at the end of the year and we pick 6 and miss out on some quarterback or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? So we are in this difficult spot. And as we go over that, look, you and I, we've talked about a lot of Joe Schoen's mistakes over this last half hour, but I do want to bring up his drafts. So I'm going to bring that up right now. And I want you to give me your opinion on what I just said.
Yeah. So we'll talk drafts. We'll take a look after that at the roster he inherited versus the roster he had at the beginning of this year to see if it's improved, if we're better off than where we were. But we'll start with, his first draft here, 2022. He comes into a situation where, I'll say this, Nick, for all the crap we gave Dave Gettleman, rightfully so, about his salary cap decisions and his spending, and for all the credit, I guess you could call it, we gave Joe Schoen in the sense that, look, he inherited such a bad situation. He needs to be graded on a scale because of it. Well, from a draft capital standpoint, he inherited an incredible situation. Dave Gettleman traded back the year before he got fired and gave Joe Schoen an extra first-round pick, and that first-round pick ended up being 5th overall. Was it the 5th or the 7th the Bears gave us? I actually don't remember.
We got the 7th from the Bears.
Okay, that pick ended up being the 7th overall pick in a draft class, Nick. That is incredible capital to inherit for Joe Schoen. He had as good as it gets, and what does he do with it? He takes Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal at 5 and 7. He takes a player who, one, was expected to be the top edge in the class that fell off after his last season and became maybe an edge 2 or edge 3 from projection. And then a tackle who many believed were the best in the class, the Dallas Cowboys, who've done an insanely good job building their offensive line. Even this year, with the issues they had early in the year with the O-line, it became great at the end of the year for Rico Dowdle because they just somehow know how to do it. They had Evan Neal as the number 1 ranked player on their entire board overall, not just OT.
Thanks,
And they
Jerry.
had Kayvon too. It's something we all know because for some reason Jerry Jones, like, he leaks. The Cowboys have like 17 leaked draft boards online. I don't know what they're doing there. They can't keep their shit in house.
Yeah.
But
Jerry Jones does a lot of wild stuff.
yeah, he does.
Caught on Instagram Live with Jamie Foxx. If you know, you know.
Oh, I don't even know what that is.
I'll
But
give it a Google.
oh God. But I'll say this as a regards to this. So now it becomes the debate, and we'll start with this in the first round. But like, is it Joe Schoen's fault that these guys aren't that good? Well, one is a terrible bust, Evan Neal, who might be an okay guard at some point for the Giants or another team. And the other, Kayvon Thibodeau, is not a bust, but he's not nearly as good as he should be for the 5th overall pick, and obviously not a difference-making star, though I know he believes he is, which I don't love, by the way, anyway, from a personality trait standpoint. So is it Joe Schoen's fault that guys who were projected to be great, and he did the right thing at the time, right? According to many, this is what you're supposed to do. Everyone had these guys here. We needed an edge. We needed a tackle. He did the 2 biggest needs on the team, and he found the talent that matches with the needs. It aligns perfectly. Or is it his job to evaluate these players, project them, and get the projection right? Like, not just be like, they were supposed to take these guys. It said, on paper, these are great moves. On paper, they're great moves. Why do we care about that? I see that a lot in my replies, Nick, on Twitter when we talk about this type of stuff. Like, no, everyone said they were supposed to take Neal. Everyone had Neal ranked high. Everyone had Kayvon. Okay, great. Everyone had them ranked high. Guess what? Draft nicks don't matter. Guess what? Draft evaluations don't matter. All that matters is, are the players good or not? It doesn't matter who expected them to be good and what you did best on paper. None of that shit matters, right? I could look at a freaking I could look at a par 4, Nick, with a narrow fairway and say, oh, it's probably better if I hit my 7-iron or 6-iron here. I'll get it 160, 155 straight into the fairway. Or I could take the driver, which is a stupid move on a narrow fairway, but I blasted 280, or no, I'm never doing that. I blasted 250. I've had 270.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks.
Great, and it hits the fairway, and that's what matters, the end result. I don't give a fuck what was smarter to do. I want the end result. So I don't know if I excuse those picks, Nick. I don't personally, but we can move past. Let's hear your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to the rest of this draft.
Look at just the totality of the 2023 and 2022 class. Now, look, you usually want to give 3 years for these, for us to give our actual opinions of how these draft picks manifested. But let's be honest, it has not been good, right? It has not been good, especially from this 2022 draft class. And you can even overlook the Evan Neal and just say, hey, that could be a bust, whatever. You look at the 3rd round, Josh Azudu, he's doing nothing on this roster. Cordell Fly, he's okay at best, but that's a massive stretch.
That's an early third, by the way, with Azudu, 67 overall.
67 and 81 overall, respectively, for Azudu and Flott. Daniel Bellinger we like, but the Giants weren't as in love with him as I think a lot of us expected, and he was a 3rd tight end this year. I think that's a solid player. Dane Belton, I think, could be a solid player if he was on a good defense that allowed him to thrive in a sub-package role. Giants are not a good defense, and he is somewhat, I don't want to say a liability, but he is suspect against the run. Micah McFadden was a hit, and then Davidson, McKethan, and Beavers, that's really nothing. Davidson, I guess you could chalk up and say he's a rotational defensive tackle, but he flashes sometimes, but he more or less, you don't really want him on the football field. And then you can maybe excuse a 2022 draft. You had more impactful hits from 2023, but you have 0. Like, John Michael Schmitz is an adequate average center, and you're hoping that he takes a step. Deonte Banks has regressed significantly in his 2nd year, and Jalen Hyatt can't find the football field. And then everybody else is just like, oh, this guy's on the roster. Let's put him in when we're very injured. Or Eric Gray, let's use him as a 3rd down back because he failed as a punt returner when we tried to pigeonhole him into that role after the Adoree Jackson fiasco in 2022. So you're looking at that 2022 and 2023 draft class, and you're not having a lot of impact players. And this roster right now has Joe Schoen's fingerprints all over it. And the roster is still has a lot of holes that you can look at and say, this is not necessarily a roster that is ready to compete. And who are you going to blame at this point when you had this much draft capital? Look, the Giants had a lot of picks in 2022. They had a lot of picks in 2022. And how many impact players came out of that? 2 of them in the top 10. You could say Kayvon's an impact player, sure. But again, as you already said, and I know our listeners would agree with us on this, or at least they've heard us say this, Kayvon Thibodeau is not playing like a top 5 pick. He's not playing like a top 10 pick. And that's not great. He's okay. He's solid. I would say he's slightly above average, but you can get a slightly above average player in round 3. We need a little bit more from Kayvon. So overall, I look at Joe Schoen's job as a general manager doing the most important job of a general manager, identifying and locating talent. And I would say that he has not done a sufficient job. I think it's probably the best way to put it. And I'm probably being kind in that phrasing.
And you're referring to the draft, and that's correct.
Yes.
As far as locating and developing talent. But, I would take this even from the 30,000 foot view for a second and look at the overhaul of this. Like, what was his process like in each of these draft classes? In 2022, it feels like from the outside looking in, his process involved, and again, I want to make sure this is clear. He had the most draft capital he's ever going to have. His process felt to me, looking from the outside looking in, like a lot of needs-based picks, a lot of get up on the table and bang for a player type picks. For example, we heard this week from Wan'Dale Robinson. I read this, I read his interview from this week, and he's like big time support for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, because those are the guys that literally got up on the table and banged the table for me. Like, they loved me. And it's a I know more than you kind of pick with Wan'Dale Robinson. I like Wan'Dale Robinson. He's a good player. 43rd overall. That's not a steal by any means. Like, you can find a Wan'Dale Robinson type at 70, at 100, at 110 if you're doing a good job with your scouting. And Josh Azudu, another I know more than you kind of pick. We watch his tape. We know the program. We talk to the coach. Mac has a ton of good things to say about the kid. He's a really good kid. Let's see it. And then a year in, they abandon him on the interior offensive line and decide he's going to be a tackle at the NFL level, something he's shown no signs, literally no signs or even flashes, Nick, no flashes of being able to do. And yet they're doing that. Then you move on. Cordell Flott, skinny kid. That's fine. I liked the pick at the time. You know that I said that, and I liked it for developmental purposes. I'm kind of okay with that one. You're taking a swing on upside there at 81, Nick, and you're not guaranteed to get a player always in that range. Now you can make the case that, 11 picks earlier, they got a guy like Drew Phillips in this current draft class who is a contributor and somebody who more of a profile of somebody who can get in there because he's physical on the run game and make plays for your team early versus a Flott. And I understand that argument, but I think Flott, and I will say this, I think Flott had potential at the time of the pick. I really do, based on his length, his quickness, his ability to click and close. It just hasn't really developed yet. Bellinger, the rest of those guys, whatever, we're on day 3. So that first class to me feels like a bad process. We get to the second class, and 2023, this is the worst process I've seen of him the entire time. Multiple players he traded up for in this class. Deonte Banks, Jalen Hyatt, trading picks away to get these guys. John Michael Schmitz, to me, feels like a total, oh my God, we panicked. We have nothing at center. We didn't do anything at center. We haven't been developing anyone at center. Let's get the supposed best center in this class or second best center in this class by the books, by the process, by our needs, or matching needs with talent. And I'm always a guy, Nick, who falls for that because I love matching needs with talent. On paper, it seems like the best thing a GM can do. I love it every time it happens for the Giants. Every time in the moment, I'll love a pick like that because it's like, well, we did it. We matched need with talent. But you need a different way to process this thing and think about this thing to be a good GM. It can't just always be about matching need with talent. Sometimes it has to be evaluation of a player individually that can be an impact player for your team. He may not fit your biggest need. You need a center that year. I get it. John Michael Schmitz is sitting on the board. You need a center. Fine. But what about thinking about this a different way at 57 overall? Who's the guy who can make the biggest impact on my team? And is that John Michael Schmitz? Is it really, truly John Michael Schmitz who's going to make the biggest impact on my team with the 57th overall pick in a class, Nick? I don't believe that was the case at the time, and I don't believe he was thinking in that regard. And I'll never know the truth of that, Nick, but I am standing by that. I do not believe in that moment Joe Schoen said, John Michael Schmitz is the player who's going to make the biggest impact on the roster. I think in that moment he said he's the best match of need and talent right now for us on the board, and our offensive line coach loves him. So that to me is wrought with the issues, that process. Second half of that draft, day 3 for me, you know how I feel about day 3, Nick. I don't really worry about process there. I just want to try to get hopefully you can evaluate well. It's a tough thing to do. A lot of teams are missing on day 3 picks. And then we move to the last class. And again, this is supposed to be his crown jewel, the reason why Joe Schoen belongs here, Nick. But the reality is the Malik Neighbors evaluation, I give him 0 credit for, really. I mean, yeah, he could have, I guess, taken Romo Dunze over him, but you'd have to be, only a bad GM, I think, would make that eval. And to be quite frank, Nick, Malik Neighbors is unbelievable. So is Brian Thomas Jr., who was taken in the 20s. Some would argue he was even better than Malik this year. I disagree. I think Malik was better, just had horrific quarterback play. But I don't think this Malik Neighbors evaluation is so amazing. Now, I am impressed with the Drew Phillips evaluation. I like the Theo evaluation. I like the Tracy, obviously. This is where he starts to finally hit his stride, Joe Schoen. Drew Phillips at 70, that's a tough player to get. It's a tough position to get. Even more importantly, it's a really tough position to evaluate corner. And then obviously Theo and Tracy, those are easier positions to evaluate, but I think you're getting a lot of upside and a lot of talent and a lot of athleticism deep into a draft class at 107 and 146. That's hard to do. So this is where he starts to turn the corner for me. But man, if I'm banking on this thing and looking at it, because we always say, Nick, what do we always say with Daniel Jones? We say, why are the Giants evaluating this guy on his one good year? Why aren't they looking at the whole thing? 2019, 2020, 2021. Why do they just say all that doesn't matter? Same thing has to be applied to Joe Schoen. We have to evaluate every single year in the whole sample size.
Absolutely. And we just did here with the draft picks. I think you did a good job breaking a lot of this down. There's just not enough hits, man. Not enough hits, not nearly enough hits for Joe Schoen to hang his hat on. His pitch to John Mara is going to be more than likely the cap situation. And I think his primary, his fastball is going to be this draft class. And I think you're right with the Malik Neighbors thing. I think he'll lean on mostly Drew Phillips, the upside of Theo, what Tyrone Tracy was able to do as a 1,000 yard from scrimmage back in the 5th round to replace Saquon Barkley, who had an opportunity to set the freaking single season rushing record to break Eric Dickerson's record. And he's obviously sitting as we know now. And I think he'll lean on this 2024 draft class. And I think he's safe, dude, at this point. I mean, I don't know if we're giving our predictions, but I think Joe Schoen is going to retain his job.
Well, we'll do that at the end. I still want to do a couple things.
I just did it now.
Yeah. You gave yours. I'll give mine at the end. Or I could just give mine now. It doesn't matter. I think that Joe Schoen will be retained, but I'm holding out hope that he won't be. And I'll say this as far as my prediction goes. I think that Brian Daboll will be fired, and I'm also holding out hope that he won't be. Not because I love Daboll long term, because if you're keeping Schoen, I do not want a lame duck head coach in here. And who the hell would they even get? There's no one who they'll even be able to get at head coach. So I'd rather just have somebody who, like the Giants guy I talked with earlier, Nick, and I agree with and you agree with, because we're the ones who are watching the tape, and that person was as well. His offense is good on tape, Daboll, from a schematic standpoint. And that's not something, it's like, it seems like something that's like, whatever, like, we'll just get that. We'll fire him and we'll get that. No, you don't just get that. You do not just get that. There are a lot of really bad offensive coordinators and offensive play callers who get the chance to run an offense, and they're just not good from the start. Shane Waldron, this new guy for the Bears, I think sucks. This Tim Brown, whatever his name is, the guy who their interim head coach is now calling the plays, he sucks too. Like, I see a lot of poorly schemed offense. I mean, Nick, how far do we have to look? Jason Garrett, we watched 2 years of film of what a bad offensive coordinator can do to an offense, right?
Yeah, it was really rough too. I wanted to bring up, before we transition to Daboll, though, just the roster back from 2022 to now, just to see if the roster is better. I want to do this. Yes. Look, we already gave our opinions on Joe Schoen. I think we probably talked about this for a while, how we didn't think he was going to be let go, but we both believe it's probably necessary to rip this Band-Aid off and let it bleed out. But I'm on the same boat with you, bro. If the Giants are going, I know I slipped out. I played hockey. If the Giants do retain Schoen, I think you just retain Daboll at that point instead of putting the Giants in this lame duck situation. But ideally, I think it would be best if the Giants just moved on collectively, but I just don't envision that happening at all. So let's circle back, though, to 2022 roster and then look at the 2024 roster from the beginning of each of those respective seasons, what Joe Schoen inherited when he took the job right before free agency and what the Giants had going in. So do we think the roster is better right now than it was in 2022? And we're looking over this 2022 roster, dude. It's pretty freaking rough, dude. This is from March 1st. We got Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney as the starting wide receivers. You have this is from 2022, but yeah, Brian Daboll's
just before
free agency. So some of these names are not even going to be here, though. So Billy Price, Will Hernandez, Evan Ingram, Nate. So none of those guys even made it there, dude. So this is actually from like the end of the 2021 season. Yeah. So a lot of these guys ended up just not getting retained because Joe Schoen opted to not bring them back.
You see Kyle Rudolph on there. Somebody Dave Gilman signed in free agency, and then Kyle Rudolph's like, "Oh, actually, I need Liz Frank surgery." He's like, "Well, a deal is a deal, and we're the Giants. We already said we'll do it, so we'll honor it." Like one of the just single I just can't get back into that. It was
Yeah.
so dumb.
So the roster is not great. It's strong up front in the defense. You can look
Sure.
at the defensive line. If you look at the linebackers, you're looking at Reggie Ragland, Tay Crowd. It's rough at
There
the
was nothing.
linebacker
He inherited
position.
nothing.
I would say they're secondary pieces, but he let a lot of them end up walking, specifically James Bradbury, which was the right move at the time from Joe Schoen's perspective. You have young Xavier McKinney, you have Andrew Thomas. So it's not great. Now, if we bring up the 2024 roster, we can make our opinions and our assessments on which roster is better. I think I know where I'm going to go here. I think it's
No, I think we can look at the 2024 and we'll talk about before the injuries. So we're not looking at what it looks like now, obviously,
of
what
course,
he
of
went into the
course.
season with. And I think it's pretty clear that the only areas that Joe Schoen has not improved and has gone maybe backwards, and you could argue, would be defensive line with the loss of Leonard Williams, though
Yes.
they have added Kayvon Thibodeau. I would say Leonard Williams is probably a better player for the Giants, so you'd lose a little there. And then safety, where they went from Xavier McKinney to Tyler Nubin, and obviously Jason Pinnock as well, who will be a free agent. So let's just use Tyler Nubin there. So those are the two areas from the pass roster. Everything else, I mean, the receivers are much better now, in my opinion.
Running back too, but that's
and then running back, of course,
yeah.
losing Saquon Barkley and going to Tyron Tracy. There's three areas where, but the offensive line is light years better, especially when healthy this year, those first 5 games. Tight end position, you could argue, I mean, that Evan Ingram was still on the back end. He inherited Ingram, but I think he let him go that offseason. Could have, I guess, re-signed him. But Evan Ingram, I mean, they're not losing much there. I think they're even ahead potentially with Theo Johnson. And then D-line and safety. But other than that, like, the question is, though, like, have the Giants improved? Like, is it the same or have they improved, right?
I think they've slightly improved. But again, you're looking at the quarterback position. It's the same exact thing. So you're dealing with that same issue, and you've had years to improve upon that issue, and you have not improved upon it. So,
well, that's one thing, but I also would argue that they haven't improved a lot or enough, really. Like, so let's look at
That's
this
fair.
thing and see how much they've had, because they've had 3 years, and how much
Mhm.
is actually approved in 3 years, I think, is the question. So offensive line wise, they had Andrew Thomas then, they have Andrew Thomas now. The rest of the offensive line has genuinely improved, I think,
Yes.
honestly. I think they're about where they were at, probably at center. I don't really think they've improved that much there, but
I'd say they improved. But
what, right? Like, is he
from
that
Billy
much better
Price,
than Michael Smith?
from
Than like
Billy
no,
Price,
Billy Price. Oh,
yes.
was he?
Now John
he wasn't-
Feliciano would be a different argument.
Oh yeah, they signed Feliciano
Yeah.
that offseason. That doesn't count. You're
Yeah.
right. So they definitely improved from where he inherited there. But John Michael Smith has not been a difference maker.
Look, dude, if we want to look at it like this, what were the biggest issues of that roster that Joe Schoen inherited in 2022?
Offensive line, quarterback play,
quarterback play, lack of star receiver,
playmakers,
receiving talent, linebackers.
Sure.
All of them improved except for the most important one, which is the quarterback.
Okay.
So you look at it that way, and it's like that's how I am evaluating it. And I look at the positions that the positions that aren't as strong. Running back, losing Saquon Barkley, it's going to happen when you lose a player like Saquon Barkley. But Tyron Tracy just had over 1,000 yards. It's not a terrible situation, right? Like, it hasn't gone from like a number 1 position group all the way down to 32. It's still a respectable position group. Safety, losing Xavier McKinney, that's big. Should we have paid him $17.5 million? That's a lot of money. You and I wanted to retain Xavier McKinney last season, but we understood them letting him go after it was $17.5 million. Like, the Giants were not in a position to do that. You draft Nubin. I think Nubin has a lot of upside. I think Nubin will be a solid football player. So I don't think it's a terrible situation either. So I'm looking at them both. And to me, I would say 2024 is, I don't know if significantly better is the way I want to phrase it, because that quarterback still has not been identified, but it's a better situation, especially when you consider Brian Burns, what we thought Kayvon Thibodeau was going to be, maybe what he can still turn into. But then you look at the defensive line, dude, not having Leonard Williams, that's big. There's no depth there. And that's a big issue, in my opinion. So it's maybe it's a little bit more complex, and I'm a bit ambivalent with it, but I'm going to go with 2024.
No, it's 2024 over 2022. That's not what I'm, and I think that's definitely the case. But has 2024 improved enough?
I know. No, I know. Yeah. Is it still enough? And
I don't think it's
what is it? What is the enough? Are we saying enough to have Joe Schoen keep his job? Enough to just say, hey, you've done a good. Oh.
Oh no, we could even say just enough to feel confident about him moving forward as a general manager.
Yeah. I mean, not necessarily then.
Yeah, I think it's a definite no, really, on that front, because like, they have improved their playmakers We'll go by your 4 tenants right there, right, Nick? Let's go by each one. Quarterback, they've done nothing to improve. They've actually gotten worse, I think, because they're a worse team without Daniel Jones, as crazy as that sounds, because Jones was not a good quarterback. Receivers and playmakers, they've gotten a lot better. I'll say this, and I'll say it to that, especially since I've seen it recently. Wandell has looked pretty good out there, and I still believe that if he just had reps and an actual healthy freaking passing game where a quarterback can get the ball out on time in rhythm and throw with some goddamn anticipation, Jalen Hyatt would be a player. I still believe that. I don't think he'd be an amazing player, but I've seen enough from this film, from the last year especially, that I think he could be something valuable. Now, it could be just what the Marvin Mims role is for the Broncos, and that's fine. That's still something valuable that he can't achieve right now with the current situation in the passing game. So I think he's improved a decent deal there. And obviously Malik Neighbors, he found a legit star top 5 in the NFL receiver, and it's easy for him, but he still added that to the roster. O-line, that's where it gets tricky. Has he really done enough to improve the O-line? It was so freaking bad in 2021 what he inherited that the answer is yes. Yes, it is, but I don't feel great about what he's done here. I don't feel great about John Michael Schmitz moving forward. I don't love John Runyon moving forward. He's a fine, solid player, but he's getting older and he's injured, and he was never anything special to me. Greg Van Roten is old. He's not a part of their futures. They don't have a guard solution outside of Runyon, okay? And John Michael Schmitz, I'm not feeling great about. Illuminor, very good player, fine with him at right tackle. And he made a good improvement there. That still feels also like a little bit of a short-term fix as well to me, in addition to Runyon. And then Andrew Thomas was here already and still here. So, like, to me, I look at that O-line and I'm like, I actually don't think he's done enough to, you know how I would feel if John Michael Schmitz was looking and projecting like a Creed Humphrey right now, Nick, I'd be like, yes, he did it. He found someone in this draft that's locking down our line. But he's had swings on the O-line. Neil, JMS, and Azudo. Those are 3 swings in the top 67, and none of them look like stars. None of them look even above average players at the moment, or well above average players.
Average players, bro. Evan Neal and Azudo aren't even average.
Well, those aren't even average players, but I would say JMS is about an average.
I think JMS is average. Yes.
Yeah. So that's really the crux of it to me. It's like, I don't think he's done enough to improve the O-line. So now I get to your third tenet, which is the linebackers. He found McFadden. That was a good job. I'll give him enough credit. And he signed Okereke. He did a good job improving that. And what was the 4th thing you had? Was there quarterback?
Well, quarterback was one, but you could also just look collectively at the secondary. I think moving on from James Bradbury was the wise move, but that's also a significant step down from a talent standpoint. But that was the wise move at that time. Bringing in Deonte Banks should be, hey, you got that lockdown number 1, and he's been far from a lockdown number 1. Drew Phillips, that's a well-identified talent at a value, I would argue. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. But overall, I don't look at the secondary and say, hey, the secondary is a lot better than it was at that time when you had a Dory Jackson playing at a high level. And you can even make the argument right now that a Dory Jackson, a guy the Giants reluctantly signed, going into the season, is their best cornerback. Like that's not great, right? So you can make the argument that the secondary is significant, or the corners specifically are worse than they were even then.
Correct. So, and then you add in the factor that you mentioned a little earlier. They've gotten significantly worse on the defensive interior line from a depth standpoint entirely, and even from a starter standpoint, because they had Dex and Williams. Now they have just Dex, and they had BJ Hill, and now they have just Dex. And it's like they've gotten significantly worse, to the point where it was a major reason they were losing games at times this year and getting destroyed in the run game toward the middle of the season after the injuries on the offense. And so he's gotten worse there on the defensive line, considerably worse, despite having years to work at this thing and at least keep it even. So from a roster standpoint, I don't think he's done nearly enough here at all, quite frankly. One final thing I want to go over, though, the Daniel Jones decision, his biggest decision as a general manager. It's something we've talked about at length, so we don't need to get back into every aspect of it, Nick, but I do want to touch on one aspect that I think that we didn't discuss enough, Nick, and 2, I didn't do a good enough job of holding him to this standard and holding the line when the decision was made. I said throughout Daniel Jones's tenure, Nick, with the crazies on Twitter, I argued with them, that his cult fans, that no one really knows how the rest of the NFL evaluates Daniel Jones. And the reality of the situation is most likely the rest of the NFL does not think Daniel Jones is a starting quarterback. And we'll see this offseason if that is the case, or if I'm wrong about that. We'll see what happens with his situation and if he gets a chance at a starting job, which I do not think he will. And I don't think anyone will work him into his plans. But as we headed into that 2023 offseason, Nick, The options seemed that we discussed were you franchise tag him and you lose Barkley, or you sign him so you can bring back Barkley and you run it back. And they just made the playoffs, so how could you let these guys go? But there was a third option that I had discussed at length prior to that offseason I just did not touch on. It was let him test the market. Let him hit the free market and then sign him to a multi-year contract. This way you can get Barkley back by tagging him, and then eventually they agreed on a one-year deal. But by tagging him, you sign him, you don't let him hit the free agent market, Saquon Barkley, and then you take a little bit of a quote-unquote risk, not really, by letting Daniel Jones hit the market, but he comes back, and now you have an idea of what other teams are willing to pay him, and you let that shape your contract negotiation instead of the way he went, Nick, which was I'll let the market dictate what we're going to pay Daniel Jones. The market and his agent is going to dictate what we pay Daniel Jones. And obviously the agent did a great job. He got the injury guarantee in, which was a disaster, but he had two options: let the market dictate it, or let the previous when I say the market, I mean the previous quarterback contracts. Okay, so that was kind of unclear. The other way would be letting the actual market, the 31 other teams, decide it. And I'm going to tell you this with certainty, Nick. Not certainty, but I'm going to tell you this strongly from an opinionated standpoint. I know no NFL team was going to look at that and be like, we have no quarterback. Let's throw $40 million at Daniel Jones. Yeah, he looked good in 22, because they see the tape too. They see that he was hidden by Brian Daboll's offense in 2022. He did nothing. He had no throws outside of structure. He had no throws outside the numbers. He did not keep the passing game on time and in rhythm. Did not hit intermediate. Did not hit deep. He just did combo bullshit. Roll out, throw it to here. Roll out, throw it to the flat to a tight end. Oh, hit a slant. Oh, hit an RPO. Oh, hit a quick flat slant, slant flat concept in a quick game. And occasionally he rolled out and hit one big play, and we all celebrated it. No one looked at that tape and saw a quarterback who was taking his offense to the next level. Anyone with NFL eyes who watched that 2022 tape of Daniel Jones said, I see a quarterback who's being hidden by his coordinator, and he's doing a great job of hiding him. And I see a coordinator who found a loophole in the NFL currently, which is the way teams are rushing Daniel Jones is leaving the B gap open. Let's take advantage of that, and let's tell him, look on your first read, because you're a one-read quarterback anyway, and we know that. And if it's not there, just run through the B gap. And because of that, Nick, I think if he hit the open market, especially with his injury history, Nick, especially with how bad he was in 2021, how bad he was in 2022, the raw stats for the 4-year sample size, which were among the worst in the starting NFL quarterbacks. You can find these all online. His raw stats, the 4 years heading into his 2023 free agency, among the worst of all starting quarterbacks. His advanced stats, bottom barrel, the third worst or the second worst among all quarterbacks for that 4-year sample size. You can find these all online. And then the tape, his bad tape with Garrett. I would argue his bad tape even with Daboll, dude. Like, his tape wasn't good. He wasn't doing anything good on tape. We had coordinators rolling coverage away from the field side in 2022 Washington and just daring him to beat them there where he couldn't, because they knew he couldn't. These are all things that people who evaluate this game for a living, Nick, can see on tape and did see on tape. And to look at all that as a GM, Joe Schoen, and say, we can't risk letting him hit the open market, that to me is where he made his biggest failure in the Daniel Jones contract.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And I know it's easier said than done. And look, you want to take care of the quarterback position, but our biggest gripe with the re-signing of Daniel Jones was the fact that we did not see a quarterback who took necessary steps to earn a $40 million a year type of contract. So we even said at the time, look, you need to be confident that this guy can take a huge step in his development. Is it plausible? I wouldn't say so. But did he take a step from 2021 to 2022? Yes. So you really are banking on Daboll and this coaching staff's ability to unlock that, but it wasn't something that Daniel Jones innately has as a quarterback to anticipate and make those types of passes. He is more of a reluctant thrower of the football. He struggles with pacing and touch with certain throws. He could throw that straight up heavy ball and put it on a dime sometimes, and that can make a highlight reel, but that's kind of his uppercut, right? That's his primary punch. He doesn't really have a good right hook or left hook or jab or cross. He has that one punch, that one throw that can look good multiple times on film, but you need to be able to put a variety of types of throws over certain coverages, in between certain coverages, certain areas of the field. And Daniel Jones never displayed that, going back to his days in college, all throughout his NFL career. So it looked like it was going to be a disaster, and it ended up turning into a disaster, unfortunately, for the New York Giants. And letting him test the market would have gave Joe Schoen the gauge necessary to, as you already said, to actually see what we should pay this guy. It would have been a massive risk.
Well, the NFL decides.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been a massive risk, obviously, because Daniel Jones would have been very slighted by that. The agent would have been very slighted by that. And if a team came up and he gave him 28, 30, I think he might go there and just
It's
leave
so
the New
hard to
York
imagine
Giants.
any team would have done that, though.
It
That's
is,
the thing. Like,
but
you
the
know,
thing
Baker
is,
gets nothing on the open market. Why would they treat him any different than Baker? He didn't really play well in 2022. Realistically, like for what
desperate
they
general
want.
managers have made moves like this before, though.
Yeah,
Like we're acting like all of these general managers and all of these
Are
teams have
smart,
never made a
right.
mistake, right? Like
Right.
there's a lot of, it's not even just smart, it's desperation, it's risk
Yeah.
management. It's, can we design an offense around this guy's limitations and try to, there's a lot that goes into it. But ultimately, I agree with you, especially the way it all panned out. Luckily, the Giants can get away from this dead cap after this year, and it's not something that's going to hamper them for years to come, right? It's like you eat this 22 mil and we'll move on, and then we're done with the Daniel Jones experience. And I know that sounds ridiculous because this experience has been going on the entirety of this freaking podcast. And we're in year 6 at this point, Dan?
And it's still not over because of what you just said, because there's dead cap that's carried from this year into next year, and we're going to be dealing with this dead cap next year. So it's not like you can't talk about it anymore. First of all, those people suck anyway because they're just weird to me for a multitude of reasons I've gone over, and I'm sorry to say that again, but it just bothers me so much. But listen, to that point, Nick, it's like I know what you're saying, and I know there are GMs who have made mistakes like that, right? But when that contract came out, we said, okay, they're signing Daniel Jones not based on, we said this right away. They're signing him not based on what he's put on tape to this point. They're signing him based on a projection. We said he's made progress, which he had in his pocket presence. He's made progress, which he had in making plays out of structure. But the second one was just because he was the worst out of structure quarterback in the NFL, and he just got a little bit better. And these are kind of the low bar things that have put us in this hole by being like, all right, this guy made a little bit of progress, and now we believe in him. Or, it was terrible at managing a pocket. He had no feel whatsoever. He was taking a million sacks and fumbles in the pocket. Now he's doing a little bit better at that. And let's praise that. Or look, he caught the snap and he looked off the safety and then threw it to the other side. Let's praise him for that. These are basic quarterback things that we should not be praising a quarterback for. They're baseline. And then the second part of that was the evaluation in our minds, was the projection of him getting better. And this is for Joe Schoen too. Should it have been based on those progress that he made there? Or should it have been based on, is he seeing the field better? Is he anticipating windows better? Is he throwing the ball into space and letting receivers run open better?
Yeah.
Is he using the outside the numbers 10 plus better? Is he using the deep half better? None of those things he was doing better in 2022. None of those things on a consistent basis. So we had the wrong eval of what was improving and what was not improving within his game. Because if you don't throw with anticipation and you can't see the field post snap, you have no chance, no matter how much better you get in your pocket presence and occasionally making a throw when you're scrambling or running up the B gap like he did every time that year, or, operating a bootleg where you have a 2v1 and you can either run or throw and there's one defender left in the flat. Like, these are not good things that he's doing. They're not. They're just simply not. They're just things that are happening. And that year it worked because we played a shit schedule. And it didn't even really work because we were 3-7-1 at one point. So it's like all these things he should have evaluated, Joe Schoen. It's not us hindsight. And it's not okay right now to just be like, he didn't figure it out. It's fine.
I know.
He should have figured out Daniel Jones a long time ago. To me, it's the number one issue with Joe Schoen's tenure, that he was not able to see the tape and understand what Daniel Jones was fast enough.
Yeah, it's going to be his legacy here if he does lose his job, which I don't think he will this season.
Right.
And so what about Brian Daboll?
Yeah, so just Daboll, we've talked on a bunch, but I think the idea is for both of us. I think I'm predicting he will be fired, but I would have preferred he comes back if Joe Schoen comes back, and I'm predicting Joe Schoen will be retained.
I'm not 100% certain he will get fired. I can't
if
say
they win against Philly, he might have a shot to stay.
Which is just insane.
They're going to win this game. They're definitely going to win this game. I have a bad news for you. I think they're going to win this game.
They very well might. I'm not 100% sure. I usually feel like I'm more locked in with my decisions at this point, right? Like, this guy's getting canned, about all that kind of stuff. I'm not 100% sure. If I had to put a mark on it, I think I'm going to say he will get fired. Joe Schoen will pick another coach. I don't like that situation at all. I think they're either both gone or you rip the Band-Aid off, or you just keep them both at this point. I don't know who's going to want that job. And that's my big, who are you replacing Brian Daboll with, because there's a lot of reasons to fire Brian Daboll, and I think a lot of it also goes into like how this entire coaching staff has been managed throughout his tenure as the head coach.
True.
And like I look at Mike Kafka, this dude's getting held like a hostage right now. He's not even calling plays. Like what the hell's going on with him? You listen to the Wink Martindale situation last year. The entire I'm going to put the burden of this offense on my shoulders, and then the offense averages 14.3 points per game up until last week. Like there's a lot of reason to just say, look, Brian Daboll, you're canned. It's just if Joe Schoen is retained, which I really do think, like I'm putting like 95%, 90% that he's getting retained, then I don't really want to bring in somebody else who's probably not going to want this freaking job to begin with. And then you have guys like Kayvon coming out and really advocating for Daboll. And if that is how the locker room feels, I would rather just keep that band together, I think. But ultimately, I'd like them both to be gone.
Yeah, I think I'm exactly with you. If they're going to retain Shane and that's a done deal, I actually strongly hope they retain Daboll, because the alternative to me is just horrific.
It's not good.
hiring. It's just
and then
horrific.
what happens? Like then Shane Bowen's probably going to be gone, which I'm fine. Like Shane Bowen is not a difference-making defensive coordinator at this point, and he might be gone regardless of the fact. But this is a lot of turnover of a bunch of guys who I think are just going to be like hodgepodge together. Like, oh yeah, we're the coaching staff now, and we have this lame duck general manager, and the Giants suck, and nobody really, you know what I mean? So it's an awkward situation that I don't want the Giants to.
And there was, and by the way, Nick, it's gotten even more awkward and more, tilted against the Giants' favor, because if they had lost last week to who did we beat again? I fucking can't even stand it. The Colts. They had lost last week to the Colts and lost this week to the Philly. At least then, if you fire Daboll, you can say, look, you get to coach any quarterback in this draft class. That's what we're offering you as the New York Football Giants. We are offering you the opportunity to mold any quarterback from this class of your picking, and that's how you start your career as a head coach. That's actually something to offer a coach, right? And that's something that Shane could have offered a coach, and the Giants could have offered a coach. Now they don't have that on the table anymore. They've dropped to 4th overall. I think they're going to beat Philly, and they're going to drop to 8th or 9th in the draft. So there's nothing to offer a new coach. And so with that in mind, I would rather them keep Daboll. I also am not convinced that they're going to find someone who knows how to run an offense. I think it's hard to do in the NFL. And I know that Daboll can get these receivers open.
Yes, exactly, dude. And think about it too, man. Like just what you said. Who are you finding if you retain Shane and Brian Daboll's out the door? Who the hell is like? Yeah. Find it. What was Shane Bowen, like the 4th or 5th choice probably for the New York Giants last year?
Yes,
that was with Brian Daboll locked in. Now who's going to come and be this head coach? Now I get it. People will take that job because there's only 32 NFL head coaches. But is that going to be the right guy? Is going to be the guy to turn all this around? Who's operating with this dude who doesn't know up with Joe Schoen? But I also don't know the relationship of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll right now. Is there animosity there? Even though these guys were really tight a couple of years ago, like I imagine Brian Daboll, who's taking slings and arrows every week from the media, has to feel a certain way about that quarterback room. So I don't even know how well they work together now. I'm imagining they still have some sort of relationship and everything, but there's got to be some animosity there. So there's a lot of variables and factors that go into it. I think our read on it, I think we have a good read on this situation. But I don't know, man. Monday's going to come around, and I would not be shocked if Black Monday you hear nothing about Brian Daboll getting fired and he's just retained as the coach. And if Joe Schoen is, then I think that might be the best course of action in a very shitty and shady direction that we're heading down at this point, man. If you're not ripping the Band-Aid off, dude, like keep the band together. Like I feel gross saying that, but geez, I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, that's exactly where I'm at personally, based on what we went over. It's not like it's like the other option is like you get this amazing head coach. We're probably not getting that. So you have to always factor in the reality of the situation. Like we can't look at things with blue-colored glasses on, rose-colored glasses. Like this is what we try to do on this pod, and we've always tried to do that. And at times we've fallen, but we're going to fall for the bait too. Like Nick and I are going to. We've done in the past, and we will moving forward. Sometimes we will fall for the bait because it's easier to get excited about this team. And in the past we have, but now it's harder to do at this current moment, of course. But hopefully that was something interesting for you guys where we got to really flesh out, I think, almost everything when it comes to Joe Schoen. Daboll, we've talked about a bunch, and we know where we're at with that. But, when it comes to Joe Schoen, there's a lot to flesh out. And so I'll say this, unfortunately, it didn't end the way you would have hoped or we would have hoped, with us saying, yes, the Giants should retain Joe Schoen. It's a great decision and the best decision for the franchise. But the reality situation is, let's at least see it out. There was a vision Shane had when he came in here. Hopefully he gets a chance to, hopefully he can do well with that vision, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to find that.
That vision was significantly altered after
Yeah.
2022, which everyone knows at this
Yep.
point. We know Daniel Jones had no business in their vision. He was outside of the vision. He was the stopgap who ended up being the extended player and the fulcrum of the entire franchise, the thing that made the franchise go. People are like, oh, Saquon Barkley. He's like, Saquon Barkley might have been the fulcrum of the offense, but the $160 million quarterback is that face of the franchise, even though Barkley is the one in the graphics because he's Saquon Barkley. That's the biggest decision that Joe Schoen has made, as we've already went over. And look at it now. I mean, the guy, he's on the Vikings. He's in the playoffs right now. Daniel Jones is in the playoffs. If something happens to Sam Darnold, we might see Daniel Jones play in the playoffs.
They'll play Nick Mullins.
More than likely. But anything can happen.
Yeah, it is not going to go over well.
Do you imagine?
We'll see.
What if Daniel Jones steps in and wins a playoff game for the Vikings?
I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's like has any even remote possibility. Not that he couldn't win a game, that he's going to get a chance to play. Like, can't come in mid-season and expect him to play. I don't even like. We'll see what happens with Daniel Jones. I personally don't really care what happens with him. I hope for the best for him as a person. He's a great guy. He's a great teammate. Great, obviously great for the Giants in the sense of not how he played. He was horrible for the Giants and our fan base, but great that he like went to work and like never was an issue. He was the prototypical guy you want. So from that standpoint, it's like, he's just a kid who wants to be good at football. And I hope he does end up being good at football. I don't think there's any realistic scenario where he could be, but long term at least. But I hope he might have a flash of 8 games at some point. Even that seems unlikely, right? Like he never put together 8 games for the Giants, right?
This is what Daniel Jones is going to do. He's going to be like this perennial backup, and there's going to be like a Monday night or Sunday night football game. Daniel Jones, the first quarter, the starting quarterback gets injured. He's going to go in there. He's going to lead this nice victory, and everyone's going to be like,
"Oh no, what are you talking about, Nick? You just said Monday night or Sunday night. He's 1-16 in primetime games."
No, this is what I'm saying. It's going to be a nationally televised game, and he's going to have this moment.
It better not be primetime. He doesn't win in primetime. He's not going to win this game. This scenario, this made-up scenario you're coming up with, which could happen, it's not happening if it's primetime. He's 1-16.
Yes, I'm aware of Daniel Jones' struggles in primetime. My point is he is going to have that moment that will be like, oh, the Giants let this guy go. Oh, look at Daniel Jones. He's all tough and he's and it's going to be in front of a national audience is my point. Okay. And then the defensive coordinators are going to end up figuring him out, and it's going to be the same exact shit. But he'll have 1 or 2 moments throughout his career that will be memorable because that's kind of what Daniel Jones is. He flashes every now and again. He's tough. He's going to run some linebacker over. He's going to get a rushing touchdown. That was my point. I'm aware of Daniel Jones' struggles in primetime. I've covered him his entire career.
No, I know. I know you are. I know you're aware of that. And I see what you're saying. I think that's definitely possible. It could easily happen. He could be a backup and just be thrust in, and he's makes enough plays. His whole thing is, but we've talked about his consistency. He can come in from game to game and have a solid game here or there, or a good game. Even the Seattle game this year was a good game by him, but it's just 1 of every 5 or 1 of every 6, and then it's just
like, oh wait, this guy's not going to throw deep. He's not going to throw deep. Let's just sit on everything. That's like what every defense does.
Yeah, that's what every defense ended up doing to Jones. It's very hard to project him having an NFL career when that's something any defense can do to him and should do to him anytime they play him. But neither here or there. That's not Joe Schoen's decision now. We have to look at it moving forward. And I think we've came to a pretty good kind of consensus on this, Nick. We think he'll be retained. We don't want him to be retained. We think Brian Daboll, well, I actually lean toward them hopefully retaining Brian Daboll, and I'm like 50-50 on that. And I think we're both want them to retain Daboll if they're going to keep Schoen. But the ultimate goal from if we got our wish, Nick and I right now, it would be both are fired on Monday and the Giants move forward, clean slate, new GM, new head coach. Don't think that's going to happen. We haven't heard about any GM, interviews from the Giants. No interest on that front, it seems like, from John Mara, and they're ticking against the clock at this point. So, it is what it is. I think we're going to move forward with Schoen. It's just a matter of will Daboll be back.
Before we get out of here, I want to do one more question. What is John Mara's primary reason for keeping Schoen?
I think it's simply just give him a longer chance to build his vision out. Give him more time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish it was something with a little bit more substance in that.
We all do. I think that's why we're at where we're at with this.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, obviously the ownership has been part of the Giants problem as well. I think any fan at this point is well aware of that. Is what it is. It's a long haul for us as Giants fans. We had a long way to go, we think. Again, I do want to reiterate, things can change really fast.
Very quickly.
You head into that last season, 2 off seasons ago, Nobody who was a fan of the Texans thought they were going to be any good anytime soon. Nobody who was a fan of the Bengals before they got Burrow thought they were going to be any good anytime soon. And nobody, I mean nobody from the Commanders, I don't care what they say, thought they were going to be any good anytime soon if they had not taken a quarterback at that first pick and they'd taken someone else. I know a lot of people say they made a lot of changes, GM, head coach, this and that. I agree. Those are all nice ancillary supporting factors. But if they had not gotten Jaden Daniels right now, I don't give a fuck who they added this offseason at GM head coach. They would be a 4-win team right now with Sam Howell. At best, Commanders. A 3 to 4-win team with Sam Howell. Okay? And that is the goddamn truth. So the real thing they added was Jaden Daniels. The only thing that actually matters is Jaden Daniels. The other stuff are nice and they're important and they do matter. But the real thing is adding Jaden Daniels to that roster. And I know it's not always that case, right? The Patriots aren't winning even though they have Drake May, and we both believe he's played really good on tape. It doesn't always work that way. But I swear to God, if the Redskins had added all those things they added this offseason, but still had Sam Howell at quarterback, there's just no way anyone convinced me they have more than 3 or 4 wins.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, if it was maybe a slightly better quarterback than Sam Howell, possibly. I think Dan Quinn really fosters an environment of winning. I think Dan Quinn's
sure that's part of it.
He gets credit for just because he's not flashy and he's not an offensive guy. But you're right. The meat and potatoes, the steak, the prime cut, it's Jaden Daniels and it's the quarterback. And we've gone over that for years now.
And he's gone over that by the fourth quarter comebacks. But yeah. All right. Anyway, thank you to everybody listening into the Big Blue Banter podcast. Off season's almost here. We're gonna have a lot coming once Black Monday comes, and we'll see what happens with that. And we'll have things to discuss. Obviously, potentially a new head coaching search. That could be the first thing of our off season. We don't know yet where this thing is headed. Potentially, I guess, a new GM search, but I don't think we're expecting that. But it's possible too. So we'll see. Maybe a new DC search as well. Defensive coordinator Shane Bowen may not be back. So a lot to come. Thank you for tuning in. Please hit the like. Please subscribe. Please auto download on iTunes. Leave us a review on iTunes if you can. Have a great rest of your week. Happy New Year. And let's go Giants.